Welcome, everybody, to my show, The Dancing Negotiator. Sorry. I'd like to welcome you if you're a new viewer, and welcome back, old viewers, to another episode of The Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. This is the show where you learn everything all about conflict, the what, the how, the where, why, how to resolve it, and it includes negotiation, and you name it, any other strategy of conflict that you might find yourself in the workplace. I also present frameworks that are evidence-based, either produced by myself or other experts in conflict and negotiation. I share stories that might be fictional or true or partially true to illustrate a point I am making. And last but not least, I also provide mnemonics, original mnemonics, that will help illustrate the topic at hand. So today's episode is titled, A is for Assert. How to assert yourself in a conflict. So A is for Assert. It's part of the original mnemonic by myself called the 5 A's of conflict resolution. The first A is assess, second is approach, third is analyze, and today we'll be discussing the fourth one, which is assert. I won't give out what the fifth is because I want you to come back to learn more about the fifth 5A of conflict resolution. Now, one thing I would also like to mention is that I would like to reserve the last Friday of each month to have guests. And these guests will be experts in conflict resolution or have some information of value to share with us. Okay? So with not much ado, let me tell you a little bit about myself for those of you who do not know who I am. So when I look at conflict, I like to describe it and assess it from a holistic lens. So in the same token, when I describe myself, I look at myself as a holistic being. And by that, what do I mean by a holistic being? Well, human beings are made up of a physical domain, you could say biological, emotional, cultural, social, and spiritual. I like to describe myself from a spiritual perspective as I am a child of Yahweh. You might ask, child of Yahweh, what does that mean? Research it. Socially and relationally, I am a daughter, I'm a sister, a friend, an aunt. I love to dance, hence the title of this show called The Dancing Negotiator. You're like, okay, you like to dance. How does that have, or what does that have anything to do with negotiation and conflict? Well, conflict resolution and negotiation is like a dance. I also love to interpret dreams. And from a professional part of things, I describe myself as a healthcare consultant and a conflict resolution coach. I'm a change agent, advocate, and I'm also a business owner and an author as well. I'll talk a little bit more about myself in terms of a professional perspective and the services I can offer you later on in the episode. But for now, let us delve right into today's episode, which is A is to assert. Okay. So A is to assert, or A is for assert, refers to the fact of how do you communicate verbally when you have a conflict. It is all about the how, okay? And the key is when you're asserting yourself, you need to express yourself politely, express your opinion politely, okay? So I have a healthcare background, but I do not want to forget that, or I'm cognizant of the fact that individuals viewing my show may not have a healthcare background. Hence, when I provide scenarios to illustrate a point or stories, I choose workplace settings from different industries and sectors. So today, for example, we are going to be using a generic workplace setting of a meeting. What do I mean by that? Imagine whatever workplace background you come from, you have a meeting, okay? And the specific scenario we'll be looking at is an individual in this meeting speaking up during a workplace meeting and expressing disappointment about something that was being discussed or something that they were expecting that wasn't addressed, okay? So we'll just leave it generic as that. Now, this individual, I don't really want to name the person because it's a generic person, but let's just say this individual that expressed concern later on was requested by someone, excuse me, I'll just take a sip. Was requested by someone in leadership to have a chat post-meeting just to discuss what was noticed at this meeting. So two scenarios of this, one scenario, two parts. Part one, individual expresses disappointment. Part two is a meeting of this individual with someone with leadership, okay? So when you're at a meeting whereby individual parties try to understand something that happened in a meeting, there are ways to assert oneself or to express oneself. As mentioned earlier, you need to express yourself politely. So there are do's and don'ts. So for the do's component, you should be respectful. You should be polite. Be assertive. You can be firm as well, but be kind, okay? These are the do's. And this applies to both parties that are involved in the conflict, regardless of status, perceived or actual power imbalances. Each party needs to be respectful, polite, assertive, be firm, but kind, okay? Whatever you're expressing, your opinion as to what happened, okay? The don'ts are, do not be abrasive, don't be demeaning, don't be verbally abusive. Now, I pause there for a second to paint another picture for you. Have you heard the expression, fighting dirty? Do you fight dirty? You might be like, I don't understand that. Well, fighting dirty has to do with when you're in a conflict with someone, where there's a disagreement. And again, conflict, I highly recommend you go through the previous episodes. If you've not, on the website, the Win-Win Women website, under the Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA, you will find previous episodes of mine. For the sake of this episode, just a quick description of what conflict is. Conflict is a disagreement either within yourself or interpersonally, and conflict can be twofold, constructive or destructive, okay? So in this meeting, in the scenario I painted, the two parties have an option. Do we want this conversation to end in a constructive conflict or destructive? Constructive builds up, destructive tears down, okay? So I asked the question, do you fight dirty? And by that, it means, or what I mean specifically is sometimes when people are involved in a conflict situation, especially, excuse me, when they're in private, just the two parties together, some people take that as an opportunity to express themselves however they feel. After all, there'll be no witnesses. That's not right. Regardless of if you're in a public setting addressing conflict or in private, you need to be respectful. Do not be abrasive. So fighting dirty is anything like being demeaning or being verbally abusive or bringing up past events that are not relevant to the situation. I am visual, and growing up, I still have 3 brothers, but naturally, excuse me, I'm just recovering from an illness. So please bear with me if I keep taking sips of water. So that's what this is all about. But anyway, sorry. So going back to having three brothers, we used to watch wrestling all the time growing up. WWF, I think it was called. And when you think of fighting dirty, along with what I've described so far, think about, or if you've never watched a wrestling match, I highly recommend you watch one. I shouldn't say highly recommend, but feel free to watch one if you want to. But the picture and image I'm trying to leave with you is when an opponent is tired, dangling from the edge of the wrestling ring, you can see their fingers hanging on there. Your opponent can be very ruthless sometimes and just steps on their fingers, which makes them let go. So in a conflict situation, do you fight dirty? Do you, so to speak, step on your opponent's fingers? Are you ruthless? We don't want to be ruthless in conflict resolution. That's not helpful for anyone. Remember, the person you're dealing with is a human being, flesh and blood, that has feelings. How they leave that conflict situation will stay with them for a long, long, long time. Do you want to leave a bitter taste in their mouth? Ask yourself that question, okay? So that's what I meant by, do you fight dirty? Okay. Now, how do you address the conflict situation? How do you address the conflict situation? So there are many, many, many strategies of dealing with conflict, okay? So in this situation of the scenario I painted, of the leader having a private meeting with the individual that expressed disappointment in the meeting, what the leader expected to hear was an apology from the individual. Now, an apology is a useful and bona fide conflict resolution strategy. However, there's a time and place to use it. An apology, you should ask for it. You should never demand an apology in a conflict situation, be it in a workplace, family, relationships, you name it. Do not demand an apology. Ask for an apology. In the same token, if you feel you need to ask for forgiveness or you want forgiveness, someone to proffer forgiveness to you, do not demand for it, ask for it. The minute you start demanding, a wall is created, a barrier is created, and the other party even begins to feel a little bit unsafe, to be quite honest. So in this scenario, again, the leader expected an apology willfully proffered to the leader for what was expressed at the meeting. Now, keep in mind, this individual at the meeting expressed displeasure politely, respectfully. Some might call it constructive criticism, but for some reason or the other, the leaders and perhaps maybe some other people didn't perceive it as such. Others were happy this individual spoke up. I was brave to speak up. So, but here we have a conflict. One is expecting an apology of the other. So the first thing to ask yourself, will an apology actually aid in this conflict resolution? Not just in this scenario, but in any scenario you find yourself. Another question to ask yourself is there a right time to apologize? And then are you more concerned about your reputation versus character? It might be, I don't quite understand that. Okay. So let's say, using this example again, this individual that spoke up expressing displeasure, perhaps they've never done that before. It was out of character for them to do that. And then some might have said, you know what, by expressing your displeasure, you damaged your reputation. My question is twofold. First, is your reputation more important than your character? And in layman's terms, I'm going to provide my definition of the two. Reputation is what people perceive of you. It's your public image, it's what they think of you. Your character is who you truly are, your authentic self, behind closed doors when no one is watching. I think, and I submit to you, that your character is more precious than your reputation. So this individual that spoke up in the meeting, if this was out of character, even though they spoke politely and respectfully, I would have been more, my goodness, what was it that this person found to be, what was the dissatisfaction? Because this person doesn't normally voice displeasure. Yes, it was done constructively, it was done respectfully. I will be more likely to have my tenors raised. I want to understand, okay, please help me understand where you're coming from, okay? So in conflict situations, one has to be very careful that your character remains intact. Yes, reputation, you should pay attention, but it must not override your character, and you should be more concerned about your character, okay? And then the individual leader still expected an apology and asked, and it's bordered along the line of demanding an apology. Number one, this individual expressing dissatisfaction, they even believe they did anything wrong. Number one, they believed, here we are in a meeting, everyone has a right to express their opinion. You cannot work in an organization where it's always positive feedback. There's going to be constructive feedback, okay? So the individual realized this person really wanted this apology because they were demanding it. Now, how would you apologize that it would even be sincere? Did you know there are 5 languages of apology? You'd be like, huh, really? Yeah, some of you might know that, some of you, this might be new. There is somebody called Gary Chapman, and he, in conjunction with a psychologist, Jennifer Thomas, wrote the 5 languages of apology. Yeah. You'd be like, oh, that sounds like a book I might have read or a framework I've heard called the 5 languages of love, the 5 love languages. You're right, same author, Gary Chapman. So he teamed up with Jennifer Thomas to write the 5 languages of apology. And there's actually a quiz you can take, which is called the Apology Language Quiz. So either you go to his website or type in Google or whatever search engine of your choice, the Apology Language Quiz. It's about 10 minutes or less in completing it, depending on how fast you are. And the questions have to do with conflict in the workplace, in the family, relationally, etc. Okay? So I'll find that very, very useful. And why do I stress that, or why did I bring this up? The premise of the 5 languages of apology is that each of us have a primary language of apology. What does that mean? Each of us have a primary expectation or desire when someone has offended us, how we expect to receive an apology. If we do not receive the apology in that particular fashion, we'll feel like the individual is not sincere, or we do not feel satisfied. We'll leave the conflict feeling very dissatisfied and unhappy and discontent, okay? So what are these 5 languages of apology, according to Gary Chapman and Jennifer Thomas? They are, excuse me. Expressing regret, number 1. Number 2, accepting responsibility. Number 3, making restitution. Number 4, genuinely repenting. And number 5, requesting forgiveness. So in that scenario of the leader demanding an apology, desiring an apology, or wherever you are in a conflict, someone's asking you, I want an apology. Keep in mind, depending on their language of apology, they might either want you to express regret, which is basically saying, I am sorry. They might want you to accept responsibility. They might want you to make restitution, genuinely repent, or request forgiveness. Going to each one of these languages is a whole different episode, but I wanted to share that with you, okay? So your call to action, what is your call to action? Your call to action is to take the quiz and then reflect on a conflict situation that you found yourself recently in the workplace. Would an apology be an appropriate resolution to this conflict? If so, is there a proper time to proffer the apology? Is there a particular way the individual that's been injured or deemed to be injured or perceived to be injured desire how the apology is offered? Again, going back to the 5 languages of apology. Could it be that the fact that the way you desire an apology and the way someone else expresses an apology that's not congruent with the way you desire an apology, could that be a source of conflict? I think so. So that's why it's so important to understand the people you work with. Sometimes, depending in small teams, yes, you can get to learn more about, let's say, their 5 languages of apology. In bigger organizations where there are 10,000 employees, people don't necessarily have teams, it's more difficult. But just keep in mind that people have different languages of apology. You have a primary language of apology, and then you might have others that might be important. For example, from taking the quiz, I found out that expressing regrets is my #1 language of apology, meaning that's what I desire from someone who has offended me or hurt me in a conflict. And right after that, 2 other languages that tie with each other for myself are accepting responsibility and making restitution. So going back to that scenario that I created or presented, the end result was both parties ended up offering an apology. The individual that spoke up did not deny what was said, felt strongly about what was said, but then upon reflection thought that perhaps the timing wasn't appropriate or the setting wasn't appropriate. The other party, the leader, proffered an apology. Why? Because of the way some language that was used during the conversation wasn't necessarily appropriate. It didn't fall under the dues of how to assert yourself, okay? So both left that meeting that way. Now, one might say, now we're gonna talk about something else beyond the scenario, but applies to the scenario. One might say, how do you know an apology is sincere? What if it was just given just to make peace or just so we can forget about this and move on? That could be as well. That's why, again, ask for it and give a background of why, if it's not willingly proffered immediately the way you want to. So you could say, I'll feel better if it did so and so. So that's a whole different conversation about the language you can use during a conflict resolution. Communication is a big umbrella when it comes under conflict resolution. But for today, so far, what we've talked about is, we talked about the 4th A of the 5 A's of my original conflict resolution mnemonic, which is A is to assert. And then we talked about the do's and don'ts of how you assert yourself or express yourself in a conflict situation. We also talked about the 5 languages of apology according to Gary Chapman and Jennifer Thomas. Your call to action is to take the quiz and then reflect on a recent conflict that you found yourself. Reflect on if an apology is or was warranted, and how and the timing of when the apology was warranted, okay? Okay, so I promised you that later on, I will tell you a little bit more about myself professionally. And I believe that now is a good time to do that. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And by sharing my screen, I want to share with you some of the services I offer. Okay. So this, yeah. So I hope you can see that right now. So when fact that I said the Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. DHA stands for Doctorate of Health Administration. So think about how a doctor, a medical doctor, has different specialties. It could be GI, it could be endocrinology, it could be ENT, and a surgeon has different specialties, orthopedics, neurology, cardiology, you name it. So my doctorate is, think of me as a doctor of health administration, the business of health administration. I love empowering employees and individuals, leaders, all levels of an organization to have healthy work environments. And that encompasses organizational development. So as you can see on this slide here, some of the services I offer are anything to do with quality improvement, risk management, change management, strategic management, and then policy and governance material reviews. So as an example, I have helped review and create policies at all levels of an organization, including at the board level. So in that scenario, when the individual spoke up, in meetings, does an organization or a team have policies? Is it clear what freedom of speech means? What is deemed to be constructive criticism? What is deemed to be negativity? Is that clear? I can help you in creating policies like that. So it's clear, because especially when you think about it, people from different backgrounds, especially now in this global environment we live in, lots of people are global citizens. People come from various cultures and backgrounds, all working in one team. Don't expect the way you practice will be similar to the way from the environment they came from, or the culture, the organization culture they came from. Don't expect that. So that's why it's so clear that policies are clear. So everyone's on the same page, understands what the language is. Okay. So I'm also a conflict resolution coach, certified with a hybrid program with Canadian Institute of Applied Negotiation. So you can find me at www.shalomeagleswings.care. That's my website. And my email is cheryl@shalomeagleswings.care. I'll be happy to help you in any of these services I've listed here. So I would like you to remember that you can find me, you can join us again, same time, same place, every Friday for another episode of the Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. But before we close, I'd like to leave you with this thought, okay? I'll stop sharing my screen here. I would like to leave you with this thought. Remember, and it is my original thought, feel free to borrow it. Remember, you are needed in this world to be a solution. Be the best that you can, and do not rob the world of a precious gem, you. That's right, you are precious. You are here for a reason to be a solution. Have a splendid day. Goodbye.